Hello, my friends. Welcome to my corner. I love Japanese literature, as I've told you before, and today I want to share with you my thoughts and my reflections on a novel by an author that I had never read before. I have just read Woman Running in the Mountains by Yuko Tsushima. This is a book that has just been published in its English translation, literally a couple of months ago. And let's say this to just get it out of the way first. Yuko Tsushima was the daughter of Osamu Dazai, who, as you may know, is considered to be one of the founding figures of modern Japanese literature, along with Natsume Soseki and Ryunosuke Akutagawa. So we have a very important figure here, and I feel that many people will try to find connections between Tsushima and her father, Osamu Dazai, for obvious reasons. But we have to keep in mind that Dazai committed suicide when Tsushima was only 1 year old. So, it's something that we have to consider when we try to look for connections between the works of these two authors. Now, Tsushima won many important literary awards, including the Tanisaki Prize, the Kawabata Prize, and the Izumi Kyoka Prize. Ironically, most of the books that we have by her in English translation are not exactly the books that were awarded these very important prizes. So, but we do have about, 5 or 6 works by her available in English. She was very prolific, incredibly prolific, and for the most part, what she wrote, her focus was novels. Okay, so basically autofiction, what we are calling autofiction these days, highly autobiographical. In English, her most famous work, and I want to show you the cover here, but I don't know how useful this will be because you cannot see very much in this cover, but her most famous work in English, which was published maybe 3 years ago, I believe, 2018, if I'm not mistaken, in the English translation, is Territory of Light. But I had not read that book when I, experienced the first one that I have read by her, which is the one that I want to talk to you about today, Woman Running in the Mountains. So this novel is the story of 21-year-old Takiko Odaka. Okay, she lives with her parents, so mother, father, and she also has a younger brother. So this is her situation. These are her circumstances. And what happens as the novel begins is that she gives birth to a boy named Akira. She is a single mother. Okay, so that is the situation that we have here. And so the main topic of the novel is motherhood. Early motherhood, specifically, the first days of motherhood. The narrative itself, in terms of structure, is for the most part linear, though we do have some flashbacks at some points, some memories that come to her, so there is that to consider. And the story is divided into 8 chapters, okay, of different length, right? The first one is about 15 pages long, but then you have longer chapters. I would say the average chapter in this book is maybe about 30 pages in length. What Tsushima does is to meticulously describe the everyday occurrences, right? Everyday life. At one point, we even have a log in one of the chapters detailing the chapter's winter, right? Detailing Akira's behavior at the nursery, so it's very detailed in the in the information that she conveys about the growth and the development of this child. And it's almost a cliche to say this about a work of Japanese literature, but I feel that what Tsushima does is to illuminate the mundane. Okay, so those everyday things that we normally don't even pay attention to, they are illuminated by her prose. What is the conflict here? Basically, as the novel begins, everybody is against Takiko having this child. Okay, her situation at home is far from ideal. She has an abusive father, like a physically abusive, and a mother who is at times exasperating. Really, they are both very interesting characters in themselves, even though the novel focuses on Takiko. But you will see these traits in the mother and the father. And even though Takiko seems to be unaware of what the pregnancy entails. Her decision to have this child is, or could be read at least as an existential decision, right? It's almost an act of defiance when you consider that everybody around her is against her. She faces all this opposition from the people who are supposed to, support her in a case like this, her own family. So if we want to look for connections with existentialism, you will recall that the main principle or the basic principle of existentialist philosophy is that existence precedes essence, right? And one of the things that entails is that the notion that life itself, according to the existentialists, right, life itself is not meaningful. It is every person, each person who gives meaning to his or her life through his or her actions. So you could tie that to Takiko's decision to have and to raise this child on her own with this idea of existentialist philosophy. Through her decision, you could say that Takiko gives meaning to her life and she finds a purpose. Not that that makes things any easier, okay? Things do not get easier, but it's something that she does in order to have something to live for. That is how I read it, at least. I wanted to talk a little bit about the connection between life and literature. As I read the novel Woman Running in the Mountains, something I thought about was the French filmmaker François Truffaut's idea that cinema and life were the same thing, or should be the same thing. Truffaut is my favorite director, okay, not only in the context of French cinema, but of all time, I would say. And I really like that idea, the cinema and life, literature and life being the same thing. I see the same principle happening and at work, in Tsushima's novel, because the novel is obviously autobiographical. We have what, in the context of Japanese literature, is referred to as the I novel, because it's all about I do this, I do that. And you read about all the details, about how Takiko gives birth to Akira, how she deals with her family, how she cares for her child. Then at one point she starts to work at the nursery where she takes Akira. And later on, more importantly, perhaps, she works at a greenhouse, a plant nursery. It's funny, it's very interesting, because in English we have the same word, nursery, to refer to both things. At least I find it interesting as a non-native English speaker. Plot is not really the main thing here. Okay, it's not about the plot. When I reached page 200, I was like, wow, this could have been a novella. Why was this not a novella? And of course, novella, it doesn't really have to do with the length of the text, the physical length, the number of pages, as I said before in a previous video. But it gets really difficult when you reach page 200 to call a text novella, So I was wondering, why does she keep going, right, with these details? And then right at that point, on page 205, we have the chapter The Mountain, okay? And this is a turning point. This is the turning point in the novel. I would say that in a way, Woman Running in the Mountains follows the typical Freytag's pyramid structure. You have exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and denouement. So you do have that in a way. You can read that into this text. And at that point in the chapter The Mountain, Takiko has an epiphany, a moment of awareness, even, I would say, if this is not too strong a word, a type of awakening, okay? And she has that experience right there, and that is also that chapter where we find what the meaning of the title is. Until that point, you will ask yourself, why is this titled Woman Running in the Mountains? That chapter clarifies things for us. And it was at that point that I figured out and I realized why Woman Running in the Mountains is not a novella. Tsushima is basically asking you to follow her through many humdrum, seemingly unimportant events, okay? But just, trust her. She knows where she's going, even if her protagonist, Takiko, does not. So it's a matter of just letting the author, the narrator, guide you through this brilliant text. Further reading, for more on texts that explore parenthood, Since we're talking about Japanese literature, this would be a good text to compare this novel to. Kensaburo Oe's A Personal Matter. Okay, famous novel. Okay, an existentialist text also that is also autobiographical, even if we would not precisely call it an example of I fiction. But the description here says his most popular book, A Personal Matter, is the story of Bird, a frustrated intellectual in a failing marriage whose utopian dream is shattered when his wife gives birth to a brain-damaged child. So this is Kensaburo Oe's story, and also the story of a fictional protagonist. Very interesting text to compare to Woman Running in the Mountains, even if this one by Kensaburo Oe focuses on the father. Okay, so we do have that difference there to consider. And another text that deals with this topic, very different also, would be Doris Lessing's The Fifth Child. I do have a copy, but it's not, here in my room, so I cannot show you that. This is a very dark story. It's a horror story, really, if we're going to call it by its true name. So Woman Running in the Mountains really leaves me with the desire to read more by Tsushima, so I'm going to follow that. I'm going to continue my reading of her work through with the most obvious step, which would be Territory of Light, which I have right here. It's a little bit shorter, I believe, than Woman Running in the Mountains. So that would be my next step, and if I feel that it's worthwhile, I will share my ideas with you on that other novel. So those were my thoughts on Woman Running in the Mountains, a novel by Yuko Tsushima. Have you read it? I would love to hear your thoughts about it, and as usual, any comments, questions, recommendations that you may have. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.